What if history isn't just a linear march, but a repeating echo? Imagine women centuries apart, born into different worlds, yet their lives mirror each other in chilling detail. Is this destiny, a glitch in the fabric of time, or something far more mysterious unfolding before our very eyes? Welcome to Words of Time, a channel where history's whispers meet the present. Here, we uncover the hidden patterns, timeless figures, and recurring souls that shape humanity's story. Join us as we explore how echoes of the past still resonate in the world today. Ever noticed how certain powerful women across different eras seem strangely alike? Their stories echo through time as if they share a hidden blueprint. The names and settings change, but the essence remains. Queens, mystics, warriors, and visionaries often carry a familiar energy that transcends generations. Cleopatra, Joan of Arc, Marie Curie, Frida Kahlo, and countless others appear as variations of an enduring pattern. These figures are not reincarnations of one another, yet they seem to embody a recurring force in human history. It is as though the world keeps calling forth the same type of woman whenever it reaches a moment of transformation or crisis. The concept of mysteriously repeated women refers to the reappearance of archetypes rather than individuals. These women represent deep symbols rooted in human consciousness. Across cultures, certain figures arise again and again, each shaped by her time but echoing the same qualities. The repeated woman is not a ghost of the past, but a mirror reflecting collective desires, fears, and ideals. She carries within her the history of all who came before, embodying resilience, rebellion, and wisdom in different forms. The phenomenon challenges how we think about progress, individuality, and the nature of influence. To understand these archetypes, we must first accept that history is not a straight line, but a spiral. Human experiences return in cycles. The world changes in technology, politics, and geography, yet emotional and moral patterns remain constant. The archetypal woman appears at the intersection of power and vulnerability, creation and destruction, devotion and defiance. She is the queen who leads nations, the healer who defies reason, the artist who paints her pain into immortality, the thinker who shatters conventions. Her story is retold not because she is remembered, but because she is needed. When we look back, we find echoes of the same soul in different skins. Cleopatra and Elizabeth I both ruled with intellect and charisma in male-dominated worlds. They mastered politics as theater, using their presence as strategy. Centuries later, women like Margaret Thatcher or Indira Gandhi re-emerged with the same archetypal energy, commanding, polarizing, and decisive. In another context, mystics like Hildegard of Bingen and the poet-prophet Mirabai embodied a divine connection that transcended dogma. They represented women whose voices carried spiritual truth beyond institutional control. In the modern era, figures such as Maya Angelou or Malala Yousafzai carry the same spiritual defiance in a new form, speaking truth through art or activism rather than prophecy. The repeated woman also takes the form of the artist who turns suffering into creation. Frida Kahlo's self-portraits confront pain with color and defiance. Centuries earlier, Artemisia Gentileschi painted women who fought back against violation and silence. Both women turned private trauma into public statement, embodying the archetype of the wounded creator. This pattern can even be seen in literary figures such as Emily Dickinson and Sylvia Plath, who used language to transmute isolation into timeless expression. Each era has its own Frida, its own Emily, a woman who translates emotion into revelation. Another recurring archetype is the rebel who challenges systems built to contain her. Joan of Arc rode into battle guided by conviction, only to be condemned for her defiance. Her spirit reappears in countless revolutionaries who break boundaries of gender and faith. From Sojourner Truth to Rosa Parks to Greta Thunberg, the essence is the same, a woman who stands in the face of established order and forces it to reckon with its contradictions. Their courage may take different shapes, swords, speeches, or silent protest, but the core impulse remains unchanged. The rebel woman embodies moral clarity that society resists until it can no longer ignore her. The beauty of these archetypes lies not in their perfection, but in their contradiction. The repeated woman often exists in tension with the world around her. She is celebrated and condemned, desired and feared, elevated and destroyed. Cleopatra was both queen and seductress, visionary and villain. Marie Antoinette became a symbol of both extravagance and innocence. Marilyn Monroe stood at the crossroads of power and exploitation, intellect, and image. The pattern suggests that society repeatedly creates powerful women, then punishes them for their power. Each archetype becomes a lesson about how humanity negotiates its relationship with authority, gender, and identity. This cycle is not confined to famous names. The archetypal pattern also shapes ordinary lives. Every generation produces women who quietly embody the same energies. The healer who mends her community, the mother who holds a broken household together, the teacher who reshapes young minds, the worker who fights unseen battles. These women may never be written into history, but they keep the archetype alive in daily existence. Their repetition is less visible, but no less profound. The mythic becomes real in the acts of care, courage, and creation that sustain society. Psychologically, the recurrence of these archetypes reveals something about human nature. Carl Jung described archetypes as universal symbols embedded in the collective unconscious. They are patterns of thought and emotion shared by all people, expressed through myth, art, and behavior. The repeated woman is a projection of these inner templates. When a culture suppresses certain energies, like intuition, creativity, or compassion, they reappear through individuals who embody them. This explains why some figures seem to arise out of nowhere, speaking to a need that no one realized existed until they appeared. The repeated woman becomes a vessel for what humanity is ready to remember. The power of these archetypes also lies in their adaptability. Each era reshapes them according to its values and conflicts. The healer becomes a scientist in one age, a social worker in another. The queen transforms from monarch to political leader, the mystic to poet or activist. What remains constant is the symbolic function. The woman who bridges opposites, who carries within her both reason and emotion, structure and chaos. In this sense, the repeated woman is not a person but a principle, the eternal balance humanity seeks between power and empathy. Understanding this phenomenon matters because it shows how culture evolves through memory. When society forgets certain lessons, the archetype reemerges to remind us. The goddess who nurtures life returns as the humanitarian. The warrior who defends justice returns as the reformer. The seer who speaks uncomfortable truth returns as the journalist or whistleblower. Each reappearance signals what the world has lost sight of and what it must reclaim. By studying these patterns, we begin to see history not as random events, but as expressions of psychological continuity. Take, for example, the archetype of the mother figure. In mythology, she appears as Demeter, Isis, or Mary, the source of compassion and endurance. In history, this same energy flows through figures like Florence Nightingale, who redefined care as a form of strength. In our time, it lives in leaders who prioritize empathy and sustainability. The archetype persists because the need for nurturing wisdom never fades. Whenever societies become too rigid or detached, the maternal force returns to restore balance. The same can be said for the intellectual archetype. Hypatia of Alexandria embodied pure inquiry in an age hostile to female intellect. Centuries later, Ada Lovelace and Marie Curie carried that same torch into science and mathematics. Today, countless women in technology, medicine, and research continue this pattern. The details of their lives differ, but their role in the collective story is the same. They expand the boundaries of what is knowable and challenge assumptions about who gets to shape knowledge. If we look at art and literature, we find another lineage, the muse who creates rather than merely inspires. Sappho, the poet of ancient Greece, articulated female desire and emotional truth in a world that silenced such voices. That same fire burned in Virginia Woolf, who examined the constraints placed on women's creativity, and in Toni Morrison, who reclaimed narrative power for marginalized identities. Each one gives voice to the unspoken, ensuring that the feminine imagination remains a central part of cultural evolution. Even the tragic aspects of these stories follow a pattern. Many of these women face misunderstanding, exile, or death. Their downfall becomes part of their myth, reinforcing both the danger and necessity of their existence. Society simultaneously depends on and fears their energy. The repeated woman often pays the price for progress. Her suffering becomes symbolic, a warning, and a prophecy. Yet through her pain, she plants the seeds for the next emergence. The archetype survives because her story remains unfinished. In modern culture, the archetype continues to manifest through new mediums. Film, music, and digital spaces have become stages for the same eternal roles. Figures like Beyoncé, Lady Gaga, or Angelina Jolie reinterpret the queen, the shapeshifter, and the healer for contemporary audiences. They blend strength with vulnerability, using performance as ritual. In activism, women such as Greta Thunberg or Malala Yousafzai embody the prophetic energy once carried by saints and seers. The language has changed, but the essence remains the same: the woman who channels collective transformation. The recurrence of these archetypes also reveals how societies evolve in their treatment of power. In earlier centuries, a woman's influence was often spiritual or symbolic. As social structures changed, her power became political and intellectual. Yet the pattern persists because it is rooted in something deeper than circumstance. It reflects the human need to externalize ideals of balance, justice, and creativity. When we see a powerful woman, we are witnessing a story humanity keeps telling itself about what it values and fears. What makes this pattern so compelling is that it transcends cultural boundaries. Every civilization, regardless of geography or belief, produces versions of the same archetypes. The warrior woman appears as Athena in Greece, Durga in India, Mulan in China. The lover appears as Aphrodite, Radha, or Guinevere. The mystic appears as the oracle of Delphi, the Sufi poet Rabia, or the visionaries of indigenous traditions. These figures are not copies of one another, but expressions of a shared inner structure. They show that across time and distance, human imagination returns to the same symbols when searching for meaning. The repeated woman also reflects how societies define the limits of the possible. Each time she appears, she pushes those limits a little further. When Hypatia taught philosophy in ancient Alexandria, she made it thinkable for women to engage in public intellectual life. When Emmeline Pankhurst led suffrage movements, she expanded political participation. When Serena Williams dominates tennis, she challenges assumptions about race, femininity, and physical power. The archetype evolves, but its essence, defiance through excellence, remains the same. These patterns matter today because they offer a lens through which to understand the present. In a world driven by change and technology, we still hunger for meaning rooted in continuity. Recognizing recurring archetypes helps us see how the past lives within the present. When society celebrates or condemns a woman for her ambition, passion, or independence, it reenacts ancient dramas. The debates around women in power are not new. They are echoes of the same tensions that defined Cleopatra's rule or Joan of Arc's trial. By identifying these echoes, we gain clarity about our own cultural blind spots. Moreover, the idea of mysteriously repeated women invites us to rethink individuality. It suggests that influence is not linear but collective. A woman's life gains meaning not only from her achievements, but from how she carries forward an ancient role. Every act of courage or creativity resonates with countless predecessors. This does not diminish uniqueness but deepens it. Each repeated woman adds a new verse to an ongoing song. Her choices reshape the archetype for the next generation. There is also a spiritual dimension to this idea. Across philosophies and faiths, humanity has recognized the principle of recurrence, not of souls but of energies. The divine feminine, in particular, represents the cyclic nature of creation and renewal. Whether in the figure of Shakti, Sophia, or Gaia, this energy symbolizes the eternal return of life through transformation. The mysteriously repeated women of history are embodiments of this principle in human form. They remind us that progress does not mean leaving the past behind, but awakening its deeper patterns in new ways. Understanding these archetypes also invites humility. It reminds us that no one exists in isolation. Every life is part of a larger rhythm. When a woman rises to challenge convention or inspire change, she is not merely acting on personal will. She is participating in a timeless dialogue between the human and the archetypal. Her story resonates because it belongs to everyone. The recognition of this shared pattern can foster empathy, replacing envy or fear with understanding. Yet it would be incomplete to romanticize these figures. The repetition of archetypes also exposes how slowly societies evolve. The fact that we still recognize the same struggles faced by women centuries ago shows how persistent certain injustices remain. Each appearance of the archetype marks progress, but also points to unfinished work. The repeated woman is both triumph and reminder, proof that humanity advances through the courage of its outliers, but also that it resists the change they represent. In this way, studying these recurring patterns becomes a form of self-examination. When we honor figures like Malala, Frida, or Cleopatra, we are not only celebrating individuals, but acknowledging the energies they represent within ourselves. Each person carries fragments of these archetypes: the visionary, the nurturer, the rebel, the creator. Recognizing them allows us to live more consciously, to align our actions with the timeless forces that shape humanity. The archetypes persist because they live within us. Seen through this lens, history becomes less about names and dates and more about the continuity of meaning. The repeated woman is not a mystery to be solved, but a mirror to be understood. She shows us that the essence of power is cyclical, that progress is built on return, and that identity is shaped by collective memory. Every age reimagines her according to its needs. In one era, she wears a crown. In another, she holds a microphone or leads a movement. The surface changes, but the song remains. The idea of mysteriously repeated women is not a fanciful myth. It is a psychological truth encoded in culture. It helps explain why certain figures resonate so deeply and why their stories outlast the empires and ideologies around them. They are reminders that humanity's evolution depends not on novelty, but on remembrance. Each time the archetype returns, it invites us to become more whole, to integrate what was once divided. When we recognize these patterns, we begin to see the world differently. History becomes a living conversation between the past and the present. The women who rise to prominence today are not isolated phenomena, but expressions of ancient continuity. Their voices carry the resonance of those who came before, and their struggles shape those yet to come. This understanding deepens our respect for human complexity. It turns admiration into awareness and curiosity into connection. The eternal enigma of recurring archetypes reminds us that humanity moves forward through repetition, not erasure. The mysteriously repeated woman appears again and again because she represents something essential, the unyielding spirit that refuses to disappear. She is history's memory embodied, returning whenever the world forgets what balance, courage, or compassion looks like. To study her is to study ourselves, to trace the hidden thread that binds generations together. In every age, in every form, she reminds us that power and grace are not opposites but reflections of the same enduring truth, that what is most human is also eternal. The image of a powerful queen ruling with wisdom and resolve has always carried a sense of awe and contradiction. It embodies both majesty and defiance, intellect and isolation. The archetype of the visionary queen transcends culture and time, recurring in figures who combine strategy with inspiration. Among the most striking examples are Hatshepsut of ancient Egypt and Elizabeth I of England. Though separated by thousands of years, they share uncanny parallels in the ways they navigated power, perception, and legacy. Their stories reflect how the archetype of the female sovereign emerges whenever a civilization reaches a crossroads that demands transformation. Each redefined what authority could look like when embodied by a woman in a man's world. Hatshepsut rose to prominence in an era when kingship was defined by masculinity. Born into the 18th dynasty, she was initially queen consort and later regent for her young stepson. Yet she did not remain a caretaker of power. Through gradual and calculated steps, she reshaped her role until she was no longer merely a guardian of the throne, but its rightful occupant. She claimed the full title and regalia of Pharaoh, the divine ruler of Egypt. Her decision to portray herself in male iconography, donning the false beard, the Nemes headdress, and traditional royal attire, was both revolutionary and pragmatic. It allowed her to inhabit authority in a way her culture could accept, even as she redefined what that authority meant. Centuries later, Elizabeth I faced a strikingly similar dilemma. The Tudor throne she inherited was not built to accommodate a female ruler. Her father's legacy was steeped in male succession, and her sister's turbulent reign had left England wary of instability. Elizabeth's survival required more than inheritance. It demanded performance. Like Hatshepsut, she crafted her own image with precision. She became the Virgin Queen, married not to a man but to her country. Through ritual, symbolism, and rhetoric, she created a sacred authority that merged divinity with intellect. Her portraits, laden with allegory, presented her as timeless, beyond gender, embodying the spirit of the nation itself. Both women understood that power is not only held, it is seen. In societies that questioned their legitimacy, they turned imagery into strategy. Hatshepsut's temples and monuments displayed her divine birth and cosmic favor. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari stands as one of history's architectural masterpieces, a vision of order, symmetry, and eternal renewal. It was both a political statement and a spiritual one, presenting her reign as part of the natural rhythm of the universe. Elizabeth did something similar through language and performance. Her speeches, from the one at Tilbury to her addresses to Parliament, were constructed as living art. She used eloquence to command loyalty and projected stability through words as Hatshepsut did through stone. Both also faced the shadow of male expectation. Hatshepsut ruled in the name of her stepson, at least at first, but gradually eclipsed him in both presence and legacy. Elizabeth was constantly pressured to marry, to produce an heir, to share power with a husband. Each chose autonomy, understanding that marriage would dilute their sovereignty. Their decisions were interpreted as defiance, yet they were acts of preservation. By remaining unattached, they kept their realms unified under their singular vision. They embodied a paradox. Women who ruled by transcending womanhood as their culture defined it, yet who also represented its reimagined potential. Their reigns shared another trait, prosperity through vision rather than conquest. Hatshepsut's Egypt flourished through trade and architecture rather than war. She re-established trade routes to the land of Punt, bringing wealth and exotic goods that reinforced Egypt's splendor. Her focus on internal strength and monumental art stabilized her kingdom and projected peace as a form of power. Elizabeth likewise presided over a golden age defined not by expansionism, but by cultural and intellectual flourishing. Her support for exploration and literature turned England into a hub of global curiosity and artistic excellence. Shakespeare's plays, Spenser's epics, and the voyages of Drake and Raleigh were extensions of her aura, the outward expression of a kingdom newly conscious of its identity. What connects these two rulers most deeply is their mastery of narrative. Both crafted stories about themselves that transcended time. Hatshepsut's narrative was carved in hieroglyphs, declaring her divine legitimacy. She claimed that the god Ammonius had fathered her, merging theology and politics into one enduring myth. Elizabeth's story was written through theater, poetry, and diplomacy. She became both muse and monarch, her image immortalized in allegory as Astrea, the virgin goddess of justice returned to earth. These narratives were not vanity. They were instruments of governance. By shaping how others saw them, they shaped the destiny of their nations. Yet their legacies also reveal the fragility of female power. After Hatshepsut's death, her successor ordered her images and inscriptions to be defaced, attempting to erase her from memory. For centuries, her name was nearly lost to history until archaeologists rediscovered her in modern times. Elizabeth's legacy, though preserved, was also subject to revision. Later generations mythologized her as either saint or schemer, often defining her through extremes rather than complexity. Both women became symbols, too vast for their realities, too complex for simple reverence. Their similarities suggest more than coincidence. They illustrate how the archetype of the visionary queen arises when civilizations face the tension between tradition and renewal. These rulers emerge to bridge the old and the new, embodying both continuity and change. Hatshepsut restored divine order through innovation. Elizabeth preserved political order through adaptation. Each navigated a male-dominated system not by rejecting it outright, but by transforming its language to include them. Their reigns remind us that leadership is as much about perception as it is about policy. The visionary queen archetype reflects humanity's fascination with harmony between intellect and intuition, strength and restraint. Hatshepsut's architectural vision and Elizabeth's cultural flowering reveal leadership that expresses itself through beauty and meaning rather than force. Their reigns turned politics into art. The monuments of Egypt and the words of the Elizabethan court both testify to how imagination can sustain empire. They showed that to rule is not merely to command, but to inspire. Even their personal challenges echo each other. Both face suspicion, betrayal, and loneliness. Hatshepsut's power required constant vigilance against rivals who questioned her right to rule. Elizabeth's court was filled with intrigue, conspiracies, and plots that tested her resolve. Both surrounded themselves with loyal advisors, yet trusted few completely. Their solitude became part of their strength, a space from which they could see the broader picture, unclouded by attachment. Their isolation was not emptiness, but focus. It is also worth noting how both rulers managed to embody duality. They were protectors and challengers, mothers to their nations, yet daughters of divine will. Hatshepsut's portrayal combined the male pharaoh's regalia with subtle feminine features, creating a synthesis of identities. Elizabeth's persona as the virgin queen merged chastity with fertility of the mind, the absence of heirs with the birth of a cultural renaissance. Both understood that symbolism could carry truth more effectively than argument. They created identities so intricate that they transcended human limitation. Their reigns changed how the world perceived female power. Before Hatshepsut, no woman had ruled Egypt with such authority for so long. After her, the path remained difficult but imaginable. Before Elizabeth, no unmarried woman had reigned so effectively in a European kingdom. After her, the idea of a woman as a stable and wise monarch could no longer be dismissed. In both cases, their success reshaped collective imagination. They proved that governance required neither masculine aggression nor feminine submission, but balance. Their stories redefined what power could mean. Their achievements also highlight how the visionary queen archetype is never static. Each version responds to her time's challenges. Hatshepsut's Egypt needed stability after periods of turbulence. Her vision of divine order restored confidence. Elizabeth's England needed unity after religious division. Her rhetoric of national destiny provided it. The archetype thus adapts to cultural necessity. When societies fracture, the visionary queen appears to embody coherence. When faith wanes, she becomes the vessel of renewal. When ambition threatens chaos, she tempers it with wisdom. The enduring fascination with these figures reveals the human longing for leadership that merges mind and heart. The visionary queen stands not only as ruler, but as symbol of integration. She reconciles opposites, logic and emotion, discipline and empathy, tradition and change. This reconciliation makes her eternal. Each time she appears in history, she reminds humanity that true sovereignty begins with self-mastery. Her power radiates not from dominance, but from equilibrium. Hatshepsut and Elizabeth also shared an understanding of legacy as a form of immortality. They built systems, not just monuments. Hatshepsut's trade networks and architectural innovations influenced Egypt long after her death. Elizabeth's policies laid the foundation for England's transformation into a global power. Both ensured that their nations would remember them through prosperity rather than bloodshed. In this sense, their reigns were acts of vision that looked beyond their lifetimes. They governed for continuity, not for personal glory. Yet their legacies also expose a deeper truth about archetypes. They require shadow to exist. Every visionary queen must confront forces that mirror her own light with darkness. Hatshepsut's erasure was an attempt to suppress the discomfort her reign caused to patriarchal order. Elizabeth's image as the Virgin Queen, while empowering, also trapped her within an ideal that denied her humanity. The same symbols that elevated them also confined them. Their brilliance made them mythic, but also lonely. Power granted them visibility, yet demanded concealment of vulnerability. The archetype is eternal because it captures that contradiction. The visionary queen endures because her story is unfinished. Every generation rediscovers her in new forms, leaders, thinkers, and artists who carry the same blend of intellect and intuition. In modern times, we see her in figures who lead nations, corporations, or movements with a similar balance of strategy and empathy. She continues to challenge assumptions about what authority should look like. The world still measures leadership against her example, whether consciously or not. The parallels between Hatshepsut and Elizabeth also remind us that history is cyclical in its imagination of greatness. When society loses balance, it calls forth those who embody it. The visionary queen archetype appears whenever civilization reaches a moment of self-doubt, offering a vision of harmony and renewal. She is not merely a ruler, but a healer of collective identity. Her purpose is to remind humanity that strength can coexist with grace, that clarity can arise from compassion. From the heights of their thrones, both queens saw themselves not just as administrators, but as visionaries shaping destiny. Their capacity to imagine a future beyond immediate survival set them apart. They transformed the limitations imposed upon them into opportunities for creativity. Their reigns stand as testaments to how imagination can rewrite the boundaries of reality. The monuments of Hatshepsut and the words of Elizabeth remain because they carried meaning that transcends time. The belief that vision is the truest form of sovereignty. The story of these queens also leads naturally to another recurring pattern in history, the influence that often exists behind the throne. For every visible sovereign, there are unseen forces that guide, advise, or shape decisions from the shadows. The archetype evolves from the throne room to the chamber behind it, from the crowned ruler to the counselor, the strategist, the muse, or the confidant. Power does not only manifest through visibility, it often exerts its greatest force in silence. The transition from the visionary queen to the strategic sovereign behind her reflects the next layer of the eternal pattern of recurring women. In the realm of the shadowed influence, authority becomes subtle, expressed through persuasion rather than command. The figures who occupy this role are as crucial as those who wear crowns. They operate in ambiguity, guiding without appearing to lead. Just as Hatshepsut and Elizabeth mastered the art of visible sovereignty, others mastered the art of invisible control. The story of recurring archetypes continues through these women who shape destiny not from the throne, but from its periphery. Their presence reminds us that the seat of power is never a single chair, but a network of influence woven through human connection. From the grandeur of the palace to the quiet of the private chamber, the pattern remains the same. Women who carry insight, strategy, and resilience into spaces that resist them. The visionary queen becomes the strategic sovereign of the unseen realm. Her voice echoes through counsel, her strength through subtlety. The archetype transforms but never disappears. As history moves from the open court to the hidden corridors of influence, the eternal enigma continues, power reshaped, reinterpreted, and reborn through every woman who dares to imagine a world beyond the limits of her time. The corridors of power have never been as straightforward as history books make them appear. Behind the throne, behind the signature on decrees, behind the speeches and proclamations, there has always been another kind of power at work. One quieter, more flexible, more difficult to define. After the era of the visionary queens who ruled from the throne, the story continues with those who ruled from the shadows. These women did not carry crowns or titles of state, yet their influence reached into every chamber of decision-making. They were the unseen architects of policy, the confidants who could bend history with a whisper. The archetype of the hidden hand, the covert powerhouse, reveals how influence does not always depend on position, but on perception, timing, and the human heart. In this realm of subtle command, few figures embody the pattern as vividly as Madame de Pompadour and Wallis Simpson. Both women lived in times when social structure left little official room for female authority, yet both managed to shape politics, culture, and even international relations through their proximity to power. Their paths were defined not by formal rule, but by personal connection, by an understanding that persuasion often succeeds where command cannot. They transformed intimacy into strategy, conversation into diplomacy, and charm into a political instrument. Madame de Pompadour, born Jean-Antoinette Poisson, entered the French court in an age of extravagance and volatility. The monarchy was powerful but vulnerable, and public discontent simmered beneath the surface of luxury. As the mistress of King Louis XV, she held a position that could have reduced her to ornamentation. Instead, she became indispensable to the state. Her relationship with the king went beyond affection. It became a partnership in taste, art, and politics. She influenced appointments, mediated disputes, and guided cultural policy with remarkable tact. Her genius lay in understanding that in a court driven by image, influence required theater. She turned herself into a living emblem of refinement. Through art patronage, architecture, and style, she reshaped the aesthetic of the French court. Her salon became a space where art, philosophy, and diplomacy intertwined. Voltaire, Diderot, and other thinkers of the Enlightenment found in her an unexpected ally. She protected them from censorship and encouraged intellectual exchange that would later transform Europe. Her influence thus reached far beyond royal affection. It touched the very ideas that defined the century. What made Madame de Pompadour extraordinary was not simply her charm or beauty, but her strategic insight. She understood that power sustained by emotion must also be reinforced by intellect. When her romantic relationship with the king waned, she maintained her position as his friend and advisor. Few women in history have managed to convert personal affection into lasting political presence so gracefully. She anticipated the tides of opinion, soothed the monarch's anxieties, and helped France navigate the complexities of diplomacy during a turbulent era. Yet her story also reveals the cost of invisible power. To hold influence without official recognition is to live in constant uncertainty. Every gesture must balance confidence with deference, assertiveness with subtlety. Pompadour's intelligence earned her admiration and hostility alike. Critics accused her of manipulating the king for personal gain, while admirers saw her as the only person capable of softening his flaws. The truth likely lies between. Her ambition was inseparable from her loyalty, and her self-interest intertwined with her sense of duty. This ambiguity defines the archetype of the hidden hand. Wallis Simpson, centuries later, faced a different world but played a similar role. An American divorcee who captured the heart of King Edward of England, she became one of the most controversial figures of the 20th century. Her presence at the side of a monarch was unthinkable to the British establishment. Yet Edward's devotion to her was absolute, strong enough to make him renounce his throne. In that act, Wallis did not simply alter her own fate. She reshaped the entire course of modern monarchy. Her influence was indirect yet world-changing. While Pompadour worked within the system, Wallis existed outside it. She had no official position, yet her every move sent ripples through politics and society. Her relationship with Edward brought to the surface questions about duty, freedom, and identity that had simmered beneath British formality for generations. Though often portrayed as manipulative or cold, she was in truth navigating a world where women had limited control over their image or narrative. Like Pompadour, she mastered the art of social reading, knowing when to speak, when to retreat, when to charm, and when to remain silent. Wallis understood that power does not always come from action, but from reaction. Her strength was her ability to evoke emotion and loyalty in a man who had been raised to suppress both. Through her, Edward found a form of personal authenticity he had never experienced. Whether this authenticity was politically wise is another matter, but it demonstrates the profound emotional leverage that defines covert influence. Wallis did not seek to govern, yet by inspiring the abdication, she changed who governed. The entire modern history of the British crown, from George VI to Elizabeth II, exists because of her. The stories of Pompadour and Simpson show that influence operates most effectively when it is not perceived as power. Both women understood that visibility can be both an asset and a liability. They cultivated mystique, being seen enough to captivate, but never enough to be predictable. This mastery of presence allowed them to guide without seeming to lead. Their methods were psychological as much as social. They read character like diplomats read treaties, measuring ambition, vanity, and fear with precision. In both their lives, relationships served as the medium of influence. Pompadour leveraged affection into policy, while Wallis turned devotion into historical consequence. Neither woman held military or political office, yet both shaped the fate of nations. Their examples reveal that power has layers, and that emotional intelligence can rival the authority of law or title. They remind us that politics is not only about decrees and councils, but about the human connections that underpin them. Their influence also raises questions about intention. Were they driven by love, ambition, self-preservation, or vision? The truth likely defies categorization. Madame de Pompadour may have sought personal advancement, but she also fostered cultural progress that enriched her country. Wallis Simpson may have pursued security and companionship, yet her defiance of convention forced an empire to confront its rigid morality. Both women illustrate that influence often begins in personal motives and evolves into collective consequence. The archetype of the hidden hand captures the paradox of invisible power. It thrives in a space between agency and dependence, freedom and constraint. These women operated within male-dominated systems, but found ways to redirect them from within. They demonstrated that control can take forms other than command, that persuasion, charm, and intellect can accomplish what edicts cannot. Their stories expose the complex dance between visibility and concealment, between being essential and being disposable. Madame de Pompadour's artistic vision reshaped French culture long after her death. The Rococo style she championed became synonymous with grace and refinement, influencing design, literature, and architecture across Europe. Her political role may have been contested, but her cultural impact was undeniable. Wallis Simpson's legacy, though more controversial, also endures. The modern British monarchy, more humanized and media-conscious, is in part a result of the rupture she caused. Both women turned personal narratives into historical turning points, proving that private lives can carry public significance. The hidden hand archetype is not confined to royal courts. It appears wherever formal structures exclude certain voices. Throughout history, women have exercised quiet influence in politics, art, religion, and economics through the roles available to them: wives, hostesses, advisors, patrons. Their mastery of subtle persuasion became both necessity and art. This pattern reveals a larger truth. When direct authority is denied, indirect influence becomes innovation. The covert powerhouse emerges not out of deception but adaptation. The methods of these women reflect a profound understanding of human nature. They recognize that people are guided as much by emotion as by logic. Pompadour's diplomacy relied on empathy. She sensed when the king's pride or fear could be soothed. Wallis used detachment as a tool, turning emotional distance into a lure. Both crafted their influence from observation rather than confrontation. Their power lay in anticipation, the ability to foresee reactions before they occurred. This foresight gave them an advantage in worlds where men acted on impulse and ego. Their influence also provokes ongoing debate about morality. Some view them as opportunists who exploited affection for power. Others see them as survivors who turned vulnerability into strategy. The truth is that both perspectives contain part of the story. Power, in any form, involves negotiation between personal desire and collective outcome. These women lived in societies that judged them harshly for wielding influence, even as men around them pursued it openly. Their legacies reveal not moral failure, but the hypocrisy of systems that fear female autonomy. In studying the hidden hand, we also encounter the emotional toll of invisibility. To live by influence is to depend on perception, and perception is fragile. Madame de Pompadour endured gossip, jealousy, and public scorn. Wallis Simpson faced exile and vilification, her name linked forever to scandal. Both paid for their influence with isolation. Their brilliance illuminated others but left them in shadow. Yet their endurance shows the resilience of the archetype. Even without recognition, they shaped history in ways more visible figures could not. This pattern continues into modern times in subtler forms. Political spouses, advisors, and behind-the-scenes strategists often carry the same legacy. They navigate the intersection of personal loyalty and public consequence. Their actions shape policies and perceptions, even when their names remain absent from official accounts. The archetype evolves but remains essential because power still depends on persuasion as much as authority. The hidden hand archetype represents not manipulation, but the complexity of human influence. It reminds us that history is not only written by those who command armies or sign treaties, but also by those who move hearts and minds. Madame de Pompadour's encouragement of the Enlightenment helped prepare France for intellectual revolution. Wallis Simpson's defiance of royal convention forced the British monarchy to modernize its image. Their methods differed, but their effects were lasting. They reveal how personal agency, when exercised with intelligence and courage, can redirect the course of nations. Their lives also invite reflection on the fine line between power and dependency. Both women operated within systems that could discard them at any moment. Their security rested on the favor of men, yet they used that dependency to redefine the relationship itself. They turned the private sphere into a political arena. In doing so, they blurred the boundary between the personal and the political, showing that the two are never truly separate. Their stories demonstrate that influence often arises from those who seem most constrained. The enduring fascination with such women lies in their ability to transform limitation into mastery. They remind us that power is not a fixed possession, but a dynamic exchange. To influence is to engage in that exchange consciously, to understand the flow of attention and emotion that drives decision-making. The hidden hand does not seize control, it guides it. It understands that the strongest forces in human affairs often operate invisibly, like currents beneath the surface of calm water. Both Pompadour and Simpson represent archetypes that question how history defines legitimacy. Their lack of formal authority makes their achievements more remarkable. They reveal that leadership takes many forms, some visible, some whispered. Theirs is the power of persuasion, the strength of understanding people's desires better than they understand themselves. This ability to translate emotion into action, affection into decision, marks the essence of the covert powerhouse. The legacy of these women extends beyond their specific stories. They embody a principle that has shaped human progress in every era. The idea that influence, not force, moves civilization forward. Empires rise through conquest but evolve through conversation, through the exchange of ideas and the subtle shifting of perception. The hidden hand, when guided by vision, can achieve what armies cannot: lasting change in how people think and feel. Still, their stories carry a melancholy undertone. The price of invisible power is often personal sacrifice. Both women gave up normal lives, enduring scrutiny and misunderstanding. They achieved immortality at the cost of belonging. Yet perhaps that is the fate of all who operate between worlds, seen yet unseen, central yet peripheral. Their existence exposes the paradox of influence. It is most effective when least acknowledged. From these shadowed figures, history moves naturally toward those who brought influence into the open. The hidden hand gives way to the raised voice, the strategist behind closed doors to the activist in the streets. The same energy that once guided kings now inspires movements. What was once whispered in royal chambers becomes shouted in public squares. The archetype evolves again, from persuasion to protest, from intimate influence to collective power. The transition is not a break, but a continuation. The insight, courage, and adaptability that defined Pompadour and Simpson live on in those who challenge systems directly. The difference lies in visibility. Where the hidden hand shaped change through individuals, the activist wields it through communities. The pattern remains constant. Women transforming limitation into agency, redefining power through intelligence and conviction. From the subtle grace of the court to the fervent cries of revolution, the thread of influence persists. The covert powerhouse becomes the public reformer, her voice no longer confined to conversation but amplified by cause. The next chapter in this eternal sequence unfolds on the stage of activism and rebellion, where the same wisdom once used to guide kings begins to guide nations. The archetype steps out of the shadows at last, carrying forward the timeless lesson that true power, whether hidden or declared, is always born from the courage to act with purpose in a world that resists it. When influence leaves the shadows and steps into the light, it takes on a new form. The same energy that once whispered in royal chambers becomes the rallying cry of those who refuse to accept the world as it is. From the subtle diplomacy of the hidden hand, history moves toward the unyielding reformer and the revolutionary spirit, the figures who embody conviction so fierce it transcends fear. In them, influence is no longer indirect. It becomes action, defiance, and transformation. The archetype evolves again, appearing not in palaces but on battlefields and in the streets, in the hearts of those who lead by example rather than by decree. Two of the most striking embodiments of this spirit are Joan of Arc and Susan B. Anthony. They lived in different centuries, continents, and circumstances, yet both represent the same unbreakable force. The voice of change that rises from faith in a cause greater than oneself. They defied systems built to silence them, challenged norms that defined their existence, and altered history not through privilege, but through courage. Their stories reveal how conviction, when pure and relentless, becomes contagious, how one individual can awaken collective will. Joan of Arc's life remains one of history's most haunting and luminous examples of conviction turned into destiny. Born in a small French village during the chaos of war, she began as a peasant girl with no power or education. Yet she believed she was chosen to deliver her country from despair. Guided by visions and a voice she claimed came from the divine, she convinced local leaders to grant her an audience with the Dauphin, the heir to the French throne. Her confidence, purity, and clarity of purpose disarmed skepticism. She persuaded hardened soldiers and wary nobles to follow her, not through status, but through the sheer force of faith. Her leadership transformed a demoralized army into a movement. At a time when women were barred from military roles, she donned armor, led troops, and revived a nation's spirit. Her victories were not only military, but symbolic. She turned faith into morale, courage into weaponry. The people saw in her not just a warrior, but a living miracle, a reminder that divine justice could still speak through the humble. Her presence challenged the hierarchy of both church and state, forcing those in power to confront the unsettling idea that truth and authority might exist outside their control. Joan's defiance was her strength and her undoing. The same system she inspired eventually destroyed her. Captured by enemies, abandoned by allies, and put on trial for heresy, she faced interrogation meant to humiliate and break her. Yet she never renounced her belief or her mission. Her refusal to yield, even under threat of death, transformed her from soldier to martyr. When she was burned at the stake, she became more powerful in death than she had ever been in life. Her story spread across Europe, turning her into a symbol of courage, faith, and resistance against oppression. Centuries later, her name still evokes the eternal struggle between conviction and conformity. Susan B. Anthony, though separated from Joan by time and culture, carried the same flame of defiance into a different battlefield. Her war was not fought with swords but with words, petitions, and relentless activism. Living in a society that denied women legal and political rights, She refused to accept exclusion as destiny. She devoted her life to the fight for equality, especially the right to vote. Like Joan, she began as an ordinary person driven by extraordinary conviction. She faced mockery, resistance, and endless fatigue, yet she never lost sight of her mission. Anthony's strength lay in her ability to unite moral clarity with practical strategy. She understood that conviction alone was not enough. It needed organization, communication, and persistence. She traveled across the country, speaking in towns where crowds jeered and doors were closed against her. Each insult became fuel. Her words were simple but sharp, appealing to conscience rather than anger. She turned the idea of equality from abstraction into moral necessity. In an age when women were expected to be silent, she made her voice impossible to ignore. Her collaboration with other reformers, such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton, created a movement that endured long after her death. She helped lay the foundation for a century of progress, from the abolition of slavery to women's suffrage. Like Joan, she faced institutional opposition, the law, the church, and public opinion. But unlike Joan, she lived long enough to see her ideas begin to take root. When she was arrested for voting in a national election, she used her trial as a platform to expose injustice. Her defiance in court echoed Joan's defiance before her inquisitors. Both women faced systems designed to silence them and used those very systems as stages for truth. The parallels between these two figures illuminate how the archetype of the revolutionary spirit operates across history. Both acted from inner certainty rather than external validation. Their belief was not contingent on approval or success. It was rooted in principle. Joan believed in divine purpose. Anthony believed in moral equality. Both transformed personal conviction into collective awakening. Their courage challenged the most entrenched institutions, one confronting the medieval church and monarchy, the other confronting the modern state and social hierarchy. Their power also came from authenticity. Neither sought personal glory. Their commitment was to a cause that transcended self-interest. This purity gave their words and actions enduring resonance. Joan's vision of divine justice and Anthony's vision of social equality both appealed to something timeless in human consciousness, the yearning for freedom and dignity. They remind us that reform and revolution begin not with grand plans, but with the refusal to accept the unacceptable. The courage to challenge established power is the defining trait of this archetype. It demands a rare combination of idealism and resilience. Joan stood before armies and inquisitors with the same calm certainty. Anthony faced ridicule, loneliness, and exhaustion without surrender. Each encounter with opposition only strengthened their resolve. Their defiance was not rebellion for its own sake, but faith that justice is worth any cost. Another element that connects them is their ability to inspire. Both understood that movements are not sustained by force, but by shared belief. Joan's presence on the battlefield lifted the morale of soldiers who had lost hope. Anthony's speeches awakened empathy and conscience in people who had never questioned their privileges. They translated conviction into collective energy, turning individual vision into societal transformation. This power to mobilize others defines the voice of change. It shows that leadership is not about command, but about awakening courage in others. Yet both women also paid dearly for their ideals. Joan's death was the ultimate sacrifice, an act that sanctified her cause. Anthony's struggle lasted a lifetime. She never saw the full realization of her dream. She died before women won the right to vote, yet her persistence ensured that victory would come. Her sacrifice was endurance rather than martyrdom. Together, they represent the two faces of revolutionary devotion, one burning brightly and briefly, the other burning steadily through time. Their lives invite reflection on how societies respond to those who challenge them. Both were vilified in their lifetimes and celebrated afterward. Joan was executed as a heretic, later canonized as a saint. Anthony was mocked as radical, later honored as a national hero. This pattern reveals a recurring contradiction. Humanity resists change even as it depends on it. The very qualities that make reformers dangerous in their time make them essential in memory. The revolutionary spirit thus becomes both threat and salvation, an energy that unsettles the present to create a more just future. Their methods also differ in a way that illustrates evolution within the archetype. Joan's approach was mystical and intuitive. She acted through revelation and emotion. Anthony's approach was rational and organized. She acted through discourse and law. Both modes are necessary for transformation. The heart ignites the vision, the mind sustains it. Together, they show that true reform requires both passion and strategy. The revolutionary spirit is not chaos, but disciplined conviction. In both their stories, we see how reform begins at the intersection of faith and doubt. Neither woman started with certainty from the world around her. They began with conviction within themselves. That inner authority allowed them to face external opposition without collapse. Their courage stemmed not from immunity to fear, but from clarity of purpose that made fear irrelevant. They demonstrate that progress depends not on the absence of fear, but on the decision to act despite it. The impact of their defiance extends beyond their immediate causes. Joan's legacy reshaped how people understood divine calling, nationalism, and female heroism. She became a symbol for countless movements that followed, representing the sanctity of personal conscience against institutional control. Anthony's legacy redefined democracy itself, expanding its meaning to include those once excluded. Her work continues to inspire activists who fight for gender, racial, and social equality. In each case, the individual act became a template for collective evolution. What makes their stories enduring is their universality. They belong not only to their nations, but to humanity. Joan speaks to the courage to follow inner truth, even when the world denies it. Anthony speaks to the patience required to transform belief into law. Together, they form a complete lesson in the anatomy of change: vision to ignite it, persistence to sustain it, and sacrifice to seal it. Their archetype reappears whenever the world reaches a moral impasse, whenever injustice becomes unbearable and conscience demands action. These figures also expose the cyclical nature of progress. Every generation produces its own Joans and Susans, individuals who stand against prevailing norms to demand transformation. They may not face literal battlefields or prison cells, but they face resistance in new forms: institutional bias, misinformation, or apathy. The archetype survives because the struggle for justice never ends. It reawakens whenever humanity drifts from its ideals. Each age requires voices willing to recall its conscience. From Joan's pyre to Anthony's podium, the path of reform is paved with resistance. Yet their victories, though delayed, show that ideas born from integrity cannot be destroyed. Fire can consume the body, and imprisonment can silence speech, but conviction endures. It seeps into the collective memory until it becomes part of what society accepts as truth. That is the paradox of reform. The stronger the suppression, the deeper the eventual transformation. Their lives also highlight the human cost of leading change. Both experienced isolation, misunderstanding, and exhaustion. The revolutionary spirit often walks alone, ahead of its time, misunderstood by those it seeks to liberate. Yet that solitude gives rise to clarity. When external validation disappears, what remains is the pure relationship between belief and purpose. Joan's faith and Anthony's determination sprang from that same solitude, a recognition that truth requires independence from approval. The archetype of the unyielding reformer also reveals the moral tension between obedience and conscience. Both women confronted systems that equated loyalty with silence. They proved that true loyalty, to God, to justice, to humanity, sometimes requires disobedience. Their defiance was not rebellion for its own sake, but a higher form of fidelity. In standing against unjust authority, they preserved the integrity of the ideals those authorities claimed to represent. Through their defiance, they redefined what it means to be faithful to a nation, to principle, or to truth itself. Their influence continues to shape how we understand activism and leadership today. Modern movements for equality, climate justice, and human rights draw on their legacy of courage and conviction. Every march, every protest, every call for change echoes the voices of those who refuse to accept the impossible. Joan and Susan remind us that revolutions do not always begin with armies or institutions, but with individuals who dare to say no, to oppression, to apathy, to silence. They also remind us that progress is not linear. The world advances, retreats, and advances again. Each generation must rediscover the courage to challenge what it has inherited. The revolutionary spirit is therefore not confined to history, but woven into the rhythm of human evolution. It arises wherever conscience meets injustice. It lives in those who question, who speak, who refuse to yield. As we look to our own time, the patterns embodied by Joan and Susan continue to resonate. The world still struggles with inequality, corruption, and moral confusion. Technology has changed how we communicate, but not the essence of human conflict. the tension between fear and freedom, conformity and truth. The voice of change now speaks through many mediums, but its message remains the same, that the measure of civilization is its willingness to confront its own failures. The archetype of the reformer and revolutionary spirit offers guidance for the future. It teaches that progress requires courage grounded in compassion, conviction balanced by humility. It warns that systems built on fear eventually collapse, and that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. It invites each of us to recognize the reformer within, to see that change is not the work of the extraordinary few, but the responsibility of all who believe in something better. The stories of Joan of Arc and Susan B. Anthony remind us that history is not made only by power, but by persistence. Their lives show that courage is contagious and that conviction, once voiced, cannot be unspoken. They reveal the pattern of transformation that defines humanity. From faith to action, from isolation to movement, from suffering to awakening. Each time the world forgets its conscience, the archetype returns, reborn in new voices, carrying the same timeless demand for justice. From their journeys, a question arises that extends beyond their eras and into our own. What do these recurring patterns tell us about the future? They suggest that progress will always depend on those willing to imagine a different world and to pay the price of bringing it into being. The visionary queens, the hidden hands, the reformers, and the revolutionaries are all part of a continuous cycle of awakening. Each generation inherits their spirit, reshaping it to meet new challenges. As we face an uncertain future marked by division, technology, and change, their legacy serves as both mirror and map. It reminds us that courage and compassion remain the most enduring tools of transformation. The same energy that moved Joan to lead armies and Susan to challenge laws continues to move within us. It asks whether we will follow their example, not by repeating their actions, but by embodying their purpose. For every age, the call remains the same: to listen to the quiet voice of conscience, to speak when silence is easier, and to act when fear says wait. The future depends, as it always has, on those who refuse to yield. When the stories of the unyielding reformers and revolutionary spirits settle into history, they do not truly end. Their echoes remain, shaping how each new generation sees itself and its struggles. The energy that once moved through Joan of Arc and Susan B. Anthony does not fade with time, it adapts. It finds new voices, new forms, and new arenas. The stage has changed, but the archetypes endure, emerging again and again in the hearts of those who stand at the crossroads of conscience and change. As we step into the modern age, the question becomes not whether these archetypes still exist, but how they manifest in a world transformed by technology, globalization, and cultural evolution. The patterns of the past are not gone. They are disguised in the language of our era, shaping the leaders, innovators, and influencers who define our present. In today's world, power looks different, yet the forces behind it remain familiar. The modern visionary queen might no longer rule from a throne, but she leads companies, nations, and movements with the same blend of intellect, strategy, and charisma that once defined Hatshepsut or Elizabeth I. The hidden hand still operates, though it may move through boardrooms or digital platforms instead of royal courts. The reformer and revolutionary spirit still rise, though their battles are often fought through social media campaigns, human rights advocacy, and technological disruption. Each of these modern figures carries within her the essence of her archetypal ancestors, proving that history's deepest truths are not about events, but about human nature itself. Consider the political sphere. Women who ascend to positions of authority in modern democracies often echo the visionary queens of the past. They must navigate a landscape that still questions female leadership, just as their predecessors faced the skepticism of patriarchal courts. The way they assert authority, balance empathy with strength, and craft narratives of purpose recalls the same strategies used by monarchs who redefine their nations. Leaders who project calm intelligence in the face of chaos, who embody both resolve and restraint, are direct inheritors of that archetype. They command not through dominance but through moral gravity and the perception of balance, drawing respect even from opponents. In technology, the archetype manifests differently but with the same roots. Innovators who shape the digital age often resemble modern versions of the visionary queen and the reformer combined. They see beyond what exists, imagining futures that others cannot yet comprehend. Their work reshapes economies and human behavior, much like how earlier rulers reshaped empires and faith. A woman who builds a company that changes communication or education, or one who develops technologies that challenge social systems, channels the same archetypal current of transformation. She must balance intellect with persuasion, innovation with ethics, and ambition with the weight of public scrutiny. The hidden hand also thrives in new forms. Influence has become less about proximity to monarchs and more about control over narratives. In the digital age, influence is often invisible but pervasive, spreading through algorithms, media, and culture. The individuals who shape public perception, sometimes without official power, mirror the discreet yet decisive figures of history who guided kings or swayed policy from behind the scenes. Today, this archetype may appear as the strategist behind political campaigns, the creative visionary who redefines fashion or art, or the social media figure whose presence subtly alters the way millions think and behave. Like Madame de Pompadour or Wallace Simpson, these figures are both admired and criticized, celebrated for their charm yet questioned for their influence. The debate over their motives, whether altruistic or self-serving, remains unchanged, showing how society still struggles with the idea of women who wield power indirectly. The reformer and revolutionary spirit have perhaps found the most visible expression in our time. From activists leading climate movements to campaigners for human rights, gender equality, and digital freedom, these individuals embody the same unwavering conviction that drove Joan of Arc and Susan B. Anthony. Their weapons are not swords or petitions, but platforms and ideas. They stand against governments, corporations, and traditions that resist change, risking reputation, comfort, and sometimes safety to demand justice. The essence of their archetype is not the method, but the mindset, the refusal to accept injustice as inevitable, the belief that courage is contagious, and the understanding that transformation begins with one voice daring to speak. Modern revolutionaries, like their historical counterparts, face both reverence and hostility. They are praised for their bravery, yet targeted for their disruption. This duality is timeless. Those who challenge the status quo are rarely embraced by it. The digital era amplifies both the reach and the cost of their defiance. They can inspire millions overnight, but also face backlash and misinformation at unprecedented scales. Yet the same qualities that made earlier reformers unstoppable, resilience, conviction, and clarity of purpose, allow modern ones to endure. Their causes may differ, but their essence remains identical: the drive to align the world more closely with justice and truth. These recurring archetypes reveal something profound about human nature. They persist because they express the fundamental tensions and aspirations of existence: the balance between order and change, authority and freedom, conformity and conscience. Every society needs stability, yet it also needs those who push against its limits. The visionary builds structures, the reformer breaks them when they become unjust. The hidden hand preserves harmony behind the scenes, while the revolutionary spirit tears through the surface to expose what must be healed. This dynamic interplay keeps humanity evolving. It ensures that progress never entirely stops, even when history seems to repeat itself. The persistence of these archetypes also reflects collective psychology. They arise because people need symbols to make sense of their struggles. Archetypes give form to the forces that move within individuals and communities. They are not fixed roles, but patterns of energy that surface whenever conditions call for them. When societies face crisis, visionary queens emerge to restore order. When systems become corrupt, hidden hands maneuver to balance power. When oppression grows unbearable, reformers and revolutionaries rise. The patterns endure because they are responses to recurring conditions in human life. In the modern world, these archetypes have expanded beyond gender. While historically embodied by women, their qualities now transcend identity. Yet the feminine aspect remains vital, representing qualities that have long been undervalued: intuition, empathy, and the ability to lead through connection rather than domination. These traits are increasingly recognized as strengths in leadership, innovation, and activism. The influence of the archetype, therefore, lies not only in specific individuals, but in the gradual reshaping of cultural values. At the same time, the persistence of these patterns exposes the limits of progress. The fact that we still need reformers and revolutionaries shows that equality remains unfinished. Many of the struggles Joan and Susan faced, gender bias, moral hypocrisy, and institutional resistance, still exist in new forms. The archetypes remind us that history's lessons are not fully learned until their causes are no longer necessary. They act as both inspiration and warning. Inspiration because they show what courage can achieve, warning because they reveal what society continues to resist. In politics, technology, and culture, we see the same cycle play out. A visionary builds, a hidden hand shapes, a reformer challenges, and a revolutionary renews. Then the process begins again. Each archetype is both a product and a catalyst of its time. The visionary thrives in moments of reconstruction. The reformer appears when ideals have decayed. The hidden hand operates during uncertainty, while the revolutionary rises when silence becomes unbearable. Together, they form a rhythm that defines civilization's heartbeat. If we look closely at our own era, we can see these rhythms everywhere. The rise of women in political leadership across continents mirrors the persistence of the visionary queen archetype. Their struggles to balance authority and empathy echo the same tensions faced by queens of the past. In technology and media, figures who quietly influence global narratives carry forward the legacy of the hidden hand. Activists who risk their safety for environmental and social justice embody the spirit of reformers who refuse to accept inequality as destiny. These parallels are not coincidences. They are evidence that archetypes are not bound by time, but by the structure of human experience. Understanding these patterns changes how we interpret both history and current events. It allows us to see connections where we might otherwise see chaos. When a young activist leads a global movement, we can recognize not only her individual brilliance, but her role in a larger continuum. When a leader rises to unify a divided nation, we can trace her actions to a lineage of women who have done the same in different forms. Recognizing these patterns helps us move beyond cynicism. It reminds us that while technology evolves, human essence does not. The same courage, ambition, and compassion that shaped ancient empires now shape our digital societies. The enduring power of these archetypes lies in their ability to hold mirrors to our own inner lives. They do not belong only to history's great figures, but to everyone. The visionary exists in anyone who imagines a better future. The hidden hand lives in those who guide others quietly. The reformer awakens in every voice that speaks truth to power. The revolutionary spirit ignites whenever a person refuses to compromise their values for comfort. To see these archetypes in others is to recognize them within ourselves. This recognition invites reflection. When we identify these recurring patterns in the world around us, we begin to understand that history is not something that happens to us, but through us. Every generation inherits both the wounds and the wisdom of those before it. The question is not whether the patterns will repeat, but how we will embody them. Will we continue cycles of oppression and resistance, or will we evolve them into something more conscious and compassionate? The archetypes do not dictate fate, they offer possibilities. It is up to each society to decide which aspects to awaken. The task for us, then, is not merely to observe these archetypes, but to engage with them. We must ask where they are most needed now. Perhaps the modern world requires more visionaries to navigate crises of climate and technology, more hidden hands to restore empathy in systems that prize profit over humanity, more reformers to challenge inequality, and more revolutionaries to awaken moral courage. Recognizing these roles allows us to act intentionally rather than reactively. It helps us use history not as a weight, but as a guide. Each time we celebrate a woman who redefines leadership, confronts injustice, or transforms culture, we are witnessing history's archetypes reborn. The modern visionary may be a president or an artist. The modern hidden hand may be a strategist shaping a global movement. The modern reformer may be a teacher or journalist exposing truth. The modern revolutionary may be a young person challenging complacency. Their names may differ, but the essence is the same: the courage to shape the world rather than merely survive it. In recognizing these figures, we also acknowledge the continuity of human aspiration. The same longing for justice, dignity, and meaning that drove ancient queens and reformers still drives us. Progress is not a straight line, but a spiral, revisiting old struggles at higher levels of awareness. The persistence of these archetypes shows that humanity is still learning how to balance power with conscience, vision with humility, and change with compassion. To understand the modern echoes of these patterns is to gain perspective on our shared journey. It teaches that every act of courage, no matter how small, participates in a lineage of transformation. It shows that while the symbols and settings evolve, the core struggles remain the same. The fight for freedom, the tension between conformity and authenticity, and the quest for justice. The archetypes remind us that even in an age of artificial intelligence and global networks, the human spirit still follows the same timeless rhythms of creation, resistance, and renewal. As observers and participants in this unfolding history, we are invited to look more deeply. When we see leaders rise and movements form, we can look beyond the surface and ask which archetype is awakening. When we encounter injustice or confusion, we can ask what pattern we are repeating and what lesson remains unlearned. To see the world through this lens is to recognize that we are not separate from history's great figures, but continuations of them. Each of us carries the capacity to be visionary, to influence quietly, to reform, or to revolutionize. The call to action, then, is simple but profound. Begin to identify these patterns in the stories that shape your time. Notice the recurring energies behind public figures, social shifts, and personal experiences. See how courage, compassion, and creativity reappear in different guises. By recognizing them, we not only honor the past but awaken its power within the present. History's archetypes are not meant to be admired from a distance, they are meant to be lived. In doing so, we become part of the same continuum that began with the first queens, advisors, reformers, and rebels. Their spirit survives not in monuments, but in actions that carry their essence forward. Each time someone speaks truth to power, builds something lasting, or influences others toward empathy, the ancient pattern reawakens. The eternal enigma of recurring women is not a mystery to solve, but a mirror to understand. It reflects the enduring truth that while centuries pass and societies transform, the core of humanity, its courage, its struggle, its yearning for justice, remains the same. The lesson of these echoes is not merely historical but moral. They teach that power without purpose decays, that influence without integrity corrupts, and that change without compassion destroys. They remind us that every generation must choose which part of its inheritance to preserve and which part to transcend. The archetypes endure because they are not relics but living forces. They whisper that history's greatest figures were not extraordinary by nature, but by choice. The choice to listen to their inner voice and act upon it. To understand these recurring women is to understand ourselves. Their stories reveal the structure of human potential, the interplay between fear and faith, and the capacity for renewal that defines life itself. The modern world, with all its complexity, still follows their script, whether in politics, technology, or culture. The question is no longer whether we will see these archetypes again. They are already here. But whether we will recognize them, learn from them, and allow their wisdom to guide our evolution. For in every era, the pattern continues, reminding us that the power to change history is never lost. It only waits for those brave enough to claim it.